when people have access to high quality education, they have a stronger chance of obtaining economic stability. In Washington, not all schools are meeting the challenge to build this strong foundation. There's an achievement gap affecting students of color and low-income students. How would you address the achievement gap to ensure that all people have access to high-quality education?
Regarding what you just said, should I stand up or?
Oh, whatever. I think people need to hear you.
We're having trouble hearing the button.
Okay, so you want me to stand? I really respect what you said earlier about trying to have a conversation with people rather than just talk at people, so I appreciate that. I'm working actually with Statewide Poverty Action Network right now in a coalition called the Equity in Education Coalition. Tony Lee is very active in that, so a lot of you know Tony. And basically they're coming up with the agenda to provide greater equity in education, and that includes things like wraparound social services in the school, so that if you got a kid that's hungry or doesn't have health care, there's those services that'll support that family, so they can, for example, in terms of health care, in order to succeed in school, you need to be healthy and ready to learn. Also, as part of that, we're going to essentially bring back the school nurse program. Everybody knows what a school nurse is. When I was in second grade, the school nurse did screening of me, with my eyesight, because I couldn't see the blackboard. Then it was a blackboard, by the way. Now it's like a whiteboard or whatever. But I couldn't see the blackboard very well. As soon as I got the glasses, I didn't like how they looked on me, by the way, but I could see the blackboard. I could understand the lessons that were on the board there. So we need to have a school nurse to do that kind of thing, screening for healthcare for all the kids, because all the kids should have healthcare, screening for eyesight, screening also for learning disabilities. I forgot which one of you mentioned that, because a friend of mine actually has dyslexia. He didn't get diagnosed with that until he was like 30 years old. And he dropped out of school, didn't have a very good, successful career, and got his screening, and then was able to do quite well after figuring out what's going on. I also agree with the notion about full-day kindergarten. That's very important as well, because I went to kindergarten, it was full day, so what I remember. Not that I liked it every day. Still remember Mrs. Plum. Anyway, to do all this, we need more revenue, and my time is up, and I've got lots of ideas on that. We raised $3 billion in new revenue 2 years ago, and I'll explain more about that later.
So I think the main thing we need to look at when we're talking about education is that despite all the lip service that the Democratic Party has paid to it, talking about it, I mean, of course they're talking about it, but what is the definition of the corporate politicians when they say that they're getting things done? When they're getting things done, what's happening is $3.5 billion have been cut from education. And so regardless of how sweet their words are, the reality is that services are being cut, childcare is in a complete shambles, and because people are, a lot of the households are struggling with this many-headed monster of, impending homelessness, impending joblessness, or being one paycheck away from homelessness. All these factors together are causing a lot of instability to real people. And so I would say that, we all of us here, we don't need degrees from a fancy college to understand that things are going wrong in this state. And the reason they're going wrong is precisely because the definition of fighting for ordinary people and for the poor is doing a little bit of, giving a little bit of crumbs while taking away large chunks away from them. That is not my definition of fighting for ordinary people like myself. The reason I'm fighting here, in front of you is because we need to change the terms of the debate itself. Fighting for the working class, fighting for the poor means rejecting this model where corporations get 99% of it and we are left with a few crumbs, and we are told that that's what's fighting for ordinary people, and we should be happy with it. And when Speaker Chopp says that he saved basic health, it actually is completely inaccurate. Saving basic health, in my opinion, would be expanding it for everyone. What's really happened is that you have two options. The governor says, let's cut basic health entirely. Frank Chopp says, well, let's cut most of it, but let's keep something around. And I also wanted to say that economics is a zero-sum game. So if you're taking money away from the poor, it is going to the wealthy.
So institutional racism is a daily burden that our communities face with accessing housing, credit, the ballot box, and interfacing with the criminal justice system. This oppression is codified in the rules, right? Is it embedded in the rules, come together in the rules and the allowances and the governance of these institutions as business as usual, and creates significant consequences for people of color. How would you address the consequences of institutional racism that create barriers for our members' ability to prosper? So we'll start with you, Frank, and then we'll go that way and then come back to this.
On your desk right there, there's actually a pamphlet that's on about the Voting Rights Restoration Act. A few years ago, I helped lead the effort working with Statewide Poverty Action Network to restore voting rights for folks who had served their time in prison. It was extremely important because the institutional racism that goes on in society means that a very large percentage of the prison population are men of color. We thought that was unjust that they were deprived of their voting rights after they served their time. So we led an effort with people like Julie Darneal from Tacoma to restore those voting rights because that was absolutely right to do. We need to find the next several steps in terms of actually doing tangible things that address this institutional racism. This one was not an easy thing to accomplish, but we got it done, and we did the right thing. And I look forward to your input about what's the next thing we should be able to do in the legislature.
I think there are several aspects that I would want to talk about as far as racial justice is concerned, and this is not an abstract concept for me. I am, I'm a person of color. I'm a woman. I'm an immigrant. So this is not something I need to read in books just to know what it's like. And I think one of the big things we need to talk about is, in terms of racial justice, is police brutality and how police very routinely and systematically target people of color. And one of the things our campaign is calling for is to form, as a first step, I mean, this is by no means adequate, but as a first step, the appointment of a democratic, citizen-elected review board, which will have power over the police force. So the police force does not answer to the Democratic Party establishment of this city, which actually allows this to happen. I mean, this is happening in broad daylight. When was the last time we heard a big, big person in the Democratic Party going out there and having a town hall and speaking out against racial injustice? The only way we can actually change this is if we all come together and have our own candidates and have our own grassroots movement in order to address this. In fact, if you look at the civil rights era, the only reason why we're even sitting here, you as women of color and me as a woman of color, is because tremendous progress was made by Martin Luther King and others like him. But that was when they went out on the streets, not when they joined a corporate party and fought for it.
All right, so we have two follow-up questions and then a third question. The first pertains to, and some of you spoke to, but it's an opportunity to elaborate to the education question. If elected, what would you do to reduce the racial disparities in our state education system?
Seneca, who's got a lot of years experience working in the community throughout Seattle. We're looking forward to their specific suggestions or recommendations about what we should do. One of the ideas specifically is to expand a program called the Learning Assistance Program. We created it years ago. We expanded it some, but it needs to be expanded even more. And this is a program that's supposed to go to school districts to help deal with the achievement gap, essentially by providing some extra help here and there, whether it be a mentor, or whether it be an after-school program, or even summer school, even though a lot of kids don't like to go to summer school. But it's very important to figure out what works in each school district, but to also have some oversight about it by a panel that really examines whether those programs actually are resulting in closing the achievement gap. So one of the ideas we had that we've been working on is also looking at identifying which programs that actually work to make sure that students actually graduate from high school. And to do that, sometimes it's after-school programs or having an extra mentor in the student's life, that kind of thing. So we're very much interested in working with you for things that really work in the real world in terms of addressing the achievement gap. I've got several ideas. Tony Lee, Ruth Masenga, and many others, including Statewide Poverty Action Network, have a lot of ideas. So let's work together to move that forward.
I mean, as somebody who teaches economics, there is no shortage of ideas. Absolutely, there's an abundance of ideas. What is missing in Olympia is the real political will and the fire in their belly to actually go out there and say, you know what? It's absolutely unacceptable and outrageous that there is so much racial disparity and there's so much injustice in society when there's so much money that can fund all these questions. And so ultimately we have to talk about, where is the funding going to come from? The funding has to come from where all the money is flowing to anyway, which is the super rich guys, the big corporations, the few multinationals that are making enormous profits on our backs. So if you look at the funding for education overall, like I said, $3.5 billion has been cut just in the last few years since the recession started. But long before then, for decades, funding has been cut dramatically, step by step. And ultimately, if you see racial disparity, that goes along with economic disparity. If you're black or if you're Latino or even if you're Asian, you're more likely to be poor. And ultimately, we have to address those questions not just by a few programs here and there, but by saying that this needs to be funded. Education needs to be free. Good quality education needs to be free. And in the wealthiest country in the world, we can actually achieve this, but only if we have the courage. We have somebody in Olympia who has the courage to say, you know what, we need to go after the big corporations that are benefiting from the tax laws in the state and are, giving us the shaft over and over again. So it's like 99% of the population is really not gaining much. Some of them are gaining a little bit, but most of us aren't gaining very much. And where is all this money going? It's going to the top. And so there is no, don't let anyone ever tell you that there is any shortage of ideas. There's lots of ideas. What we need is political, will, and we need people who are actually going to fight for us.
I actually directly work for an anti-poverty agency. It's called Solid Ground. The name for it before was the Fremont Public Association. Our slogan for that was freedom from poverty through action. So we spent our entire working lives there fighting poverty. This very place is one of many, many projects that I led the effort to. As I mentioned before, I stood in front of 500 angry citizens of your district saying we didn't want the housing here, but I felt it was the right thing to do to take surplus military property, this used to be a naval air station, and turn it into housing for the homeless, homes for the homeless. So we did that. We not only got the community to support it, I then got the land for free from the federal government. I then raised the money, millions of dollars for these very homes right here. And we're going to add some more just next door here next year. It is funded in large part by what's called the Housing Trust Fund. I started the Housing Trust Fund. The first allocation was $1 million, then we got it up to as much as $200 million to fund programs and projects like this all across the state, including thousands of units. In fact, 8,000 homes have been built in the Housing Trust Fund. And you figure in the family members, we're talking about 100,000 low-income people, many of whom homeless, many people of color, benefited from the work we did and what I led the effort on. But I can go on. I mean, we started in organizing home care for the elderly and the disabled. One of the best ways up and out of poverty is to join a union. So we unionized all the home care workers. There are now 42,000 home care workers who are unionized. It's the second largest union in the state, providing basic care. And we work together to give them health care, a better wage, training, etc. I already mentioned Apple Health for all the kids. Over 750,000 low-income kids have free health care because of our efforts that I led. I also started opportunity grants, working with Phyllis Kinney, who's the person you're replacing. We're going to name one of the buildings here, by the way. Well, maybe it's a little premature, but we're going to name the building here after Phyllis Kinney because she worked with me not only for the housing here, because this was her district, but also to create opportunity grants. And if you my time is up. One last thing. You probably will go to a thing at North Seattle Community College. It's called the Opportunity Center for Education and Employment. I funded that. I got that started because we wanted to make sure that everybody has an opportunity in the society.
So in terms of personal experiences, as I mentioned before, I grew up in India, which is one of the poorest countries in the world, especially because of the history of colonialism and imperialism. So although I didn't grow up poor myself, I didn't grow up rich either. My mother was a teacher. And my dad was an engineer, but he died when I was 12. So, we were raised practically by a single mother. My experience with poverty in terms of, having a burning outrage against it started from the very young age. That is one of my earliest memories that I can remember from when I was a little kid. And the question for me was not, what charity can we do for these people to make their lives marginally better? No, the question was, how is it possible that in the 20th century we have such enormous misery? That question is what has led me to this point here. And I have to say that when I came to the US, I was completely shocked at how much poverty there was, because my idea was that India is poor, so I can understand maybe there's poverty, but America is the richest country in the world. How is it that everywhere I go, I see such desperately poor people? And the reality is that you can't talk about poverty unless you talk about inequality. You can't talk about poverty unless you talk about who's doing all the work and who's taking away all the money. The working class, ordinary people are doing all the work, back-breaking work. Look at how many hours single mothers work. Look at how many single mothers work 2 or 3 jobs, and yet barely make it. So we cannot really have a serious solution to this unless we challenge the system that we're living in, where we are doing all the work and the super rich, the 1%, take away all the money. And I also wanted to say, at the very end, that I think NGOs like Solid Ground are doing fantastic work. I personally have done a lot of volunteer work for other organizations in Seattle that have worked on immigrant issues. But the reality is that for every one person that gets helped by an NGO, 10 other homeless people are being created as we speak because of the policies in Olympia, and that's what we need to change.